now invite Professor Dr. Liaquat Ali from Bangladesh. He is the Honorary Director of Pothikrit Center for Health Studies and former Vice Chancellor of Bangladesh University of Health Sciences. He had his medical graduation from the University of Dhaka in 1982 and then MPhil in medical biochemistry from the same university in 1986. He was awarded PhD in medical cell biology from the University of Uppsala, Sweden in 1990. He has just retired as the Vice Chancellor of Bangladesh University of Health Sciences in Dhaka, and he had also been serving as the Honorary Professor in the Department of Biochemistry and AMP cell biology in the same university. Professor Ali has been awarded fellowship by the World Health Organization in 1987, International Program in the Chemical Sciences, International Foundation for Sciences, Fellow of the New York Academy of Sciences and Bangladesh Academy of Sciences. He is the Joint Secretary of the Bangladesh Endorsing Society, member of the European Association for the Study of Diabetes, member of the International Diabetes Federation, and member of National Geographic Society. Presently, he is the President of the Bangladesh Society of Medical, Bangladesh Society of Bangladesh Endocrine Society and member of the European Association for the Study of Diabetes. He is the President of the Bangladesh Society of Medical Biochemistry and served as the General Secretary of the Bangladesh Endocrine Society during 2008 and 2010. He was awarded with the Eli Lilly Prize for the International Diabetes Federation in 1994. In addition to academic and scientific fields, Professor Ali has great interest in socio-cultural and literary activities. He is the founder of the Sanskritik Bikash Kendra, a major meeting place of people with liberal ideas in Dhaka, and founding chairman of Pothikrit Foundation, which operates a number of progressive activities in addition to running the Kendra. In particular, he has been conducting a weekly study circle in Kendra on the history of ideas for the last 25 years. He has particular interest in the history and philosophy of science, and Bangla Academy has published his book on geometry and philosophy. The topic of his talk today is the Bengal Renaissance and epistemological analysis. Dr. Liaquat Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your kind introduction. I would like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to this beautiful conference, which is highly necessary and timely, particularly in our context. And I would like to thank especially Professor Soumitra Banerjee and also the President, Professor Dhruva Mukherjee, for inviting me. Dear audience, good morning. I'd like to start with the famous saying of Gokhale. Actually, Professor Nagarjuna has already told about the intellectual leadership of Kolkata. I would like to repeat that. Actually, Gokhale, who was in the late 19th century, he was the mentor of Mahatma Gandhi as well as Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He said, what Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. What he referred actually is about Bengal Renaissance, because at that time that was taking place, and that led to Indian Renaissance in general. As we all know, that Indian Renaissance or Bengal Renaissance has made great contributions in fighting dogmatism and in promoting intellectual arousal with rational and liberal humanistic thought. We all have read about the fight against Satidaha Pratha, against child marriage, and also on Vidhava Vivaho or ban on widow marriage. So the Bengal Renaissance was a pioneer in reverting the orthodox, the caste-ridden, superstitious practices. And we all pay tribute today to the fathers, initial fathers, examples, Raja Ram Mohan Rai, who was the, I should say, morning star, and for particularly these social customs, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and many others we'll name later. And also, you know, that there were attempts to reform religion. We know about Brahmo Samaj and the criticism of some of the religious dogmas and some reinterpretation of Vedas. At that period, there were also a galaxy of literary creativity. To name a few, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay, Michael Madhusudan Datta, of course Rabindranath Tagore, and later Kazi Nazrul Islam. To example, only few examples, but there are a lot. And we had flourishing of Bengali newspapers and magazines. And also there were distinctive style in art. Abanindranath Thakur, Gaganendranath Thakur, Nandulal Bose, there were quite a few. And we can see at that period few eminent scientists like Jagadish Chandra Bose, Satyendranath Bose, Meghnad Saha, and Prafullo Kumar Ray. So, the intellectual, political, and economic future of the nations in the region, we all know the unfortunate divisions later, and the intellectual, political, and economic future of those nations was to a large extent shaped by Bengal Renaissance. Actually it inspired many activities, although countries were different, but many of the progressive people were inspired. For example, in Dhaka, there was one Andolan called a Buddhir Mukti Andolan, movement on the liberation of religion, which followed, and which was actually a child of Bengal Renaissance based in Calcutta. Some of the people were located in Kolkata and they later moved. And in fact, still the dominant intellectual tradition in Bangladesh is shaped by Bengal Renaissance. Even in India or in Pakistan or other few countries, we can see some of those influences. But today is not to recollect about all their contributions. You all know these facts. What is the point today? That what followed was not always what we wanted, because as you know, as from the inauguration, we are hearing that in this part of the world, we have not progressed with scientific ideas as we should. So is it only a coincident failure, or it is rooted in our history? So we have to be a little bit critical. We have to look at ourselves, what really contributed and what really contributed to the success and to the failures. So we know that parallel development of scientific culture in our region did not happen, partly due to the absence of empiricist component in the movement. So, in my opinion, Bengal Renaissance is an unfinished revolution. And this is a nice forum to talk about those shortcomings, because we as scientists or philosophers of science or activists of science, I think we should realize this, because in a purely literary forum, this message is sometimes overlooked. They cannot even apprehend, they cannot even appreciate this kind of message. So we have to look back. What were the inspirations of Bengal Renaissance? Actually, there were two inspirations. One was from the ancient India, and that was mainly from Upanishad. And Professor Dani's beautiful presentation has set the stage, so it will be easier for me. As you know, there were lots of other philosophies in India. There were quite a number of scientific philosophies or more empiricist philosophies linked with reason. But those were not the main inspirations. Another main inspiration was the European Renaissance. As you know, that was just immediately after the Indian Renaissance, the 19th century. So what is the source of the European Renaissance then? Actually, as our fathers of Renaissance understood, that was a revival. Renaissance, you know, it's a revival. It's a rebirth in Italian terms. So our fathers thought or interpreted, and many European Renaissance writings interpret like that, so that is not entirely their understanding. They followed that it is rebirth of the Hellenic civilization. What is Hellenic civilization? It is based mainly on Athens, old ancient Greek Athens, where there were lots of art and literature, architecture, you know, the revolution in drama, theaters, music, literature in many forms, architect. And particularly at the same time, there was revival of ancient Greek liberal ideas. So in Greece, there were ideas based mainly on rationalism, Socratic rationalism, because in Greece there were two schools of thought. One was Socratic school of thought, another was pre-Socratic school of thought. And in pre-Socratic school of thought, there were two distinct streams. As Professor Nagarjuna was showing, Anaximenes, he belonged to a school that was more empiricist in nature. His guru, Thales, was one of the first, and in fact credited as the first credible scientist. And Thales, Anaximenes was from Miletus, it's called Ionians. And Socratic rationalism was later actually upheld by Plato, who was against observations. In fact, he ridiculed Thales once, that at old time there was a philosopher who was walking on the street and thinking about looking at the stars to find out the mysteries of the stars, observation. Then he fell down into a ditch, and a Dash Balika actually rescued him. It was a joke, because Plato said that to find out the mystery of the universe, don't look at the stars, look at your mind. So that is reason, absolute reason. Know thyself, what Socrates said. Attanang vidhi, what Upanishad says. And Quran says that you should know yourself. That is the teaching which is the most primary. Look at insight, atta, self, ruh. So this is what a common belief, and the ancient Greek civilization, what is called Hellenic civilization based on rationalism, was purely for Plato anti-empirical, but for Aristotle. Plato was very fond of mathematics. He wrote in his academy, he who does not know mathematics should not enter into this academy. But Aristotle was more, had an empirical component. But I'm not going into details. Actually, after all, he held metaphysics above physics. He wrote books on physics 1 and physics 2. He wrote books on metaphysics, but metaphysics is beyond physics. So, this part of the ancient Greek inspiration, the empiricist philosophers, Ionians, Sophists, they were totally ignored in Bengal Renaissance. Actually, European Renaissance as parallel revival of Greek rationalism and humanism. That is a great contribution, because in ancient Greece, although there were slavery, but they have a democracy, limited, and they had a very liberal idea that they did not have any text. Ancient Greek philosophy did not have Shruti. In Indian philosophy, we had Shruti. That means sacred text. But they respected Homer too much, but they never believed in Shruti. So there were liberal humanistic ideas. But European Renaissance is not revival of only Hellenic science, Hellenic thoughts, not only ancient Athenic Greece. It was a revival of Alexandrian science. Not many people are aware about Alexandrian science. That is a super place for scientific activity. And, great names like Archimedes, Aristarchus, even Euclid actually belong to Alexandrian school. And unfortunately, even in Western histories, that component is undermined. And in Bengal Renaissance, it was almost totally ignored. Actually, Alexandria was a place where there was no department of philosophy even. They had great department of literature, art. They did not have any department of philosophy. But that actually indirectly teaches. Sometimes absence of a department can teach more than its presence. That absence taught about the sticking to evidence, reasoning, how you can come to scientific evidence and scientific reasoning. So, this is a very important part of our intellectual history on the whole world, but that was unfortunately totally ignored. It was not discussed at all or very lightly. So, actually, the European science was conceived, and particularly in the morning, the Honorable Vice Chancellor was saying about social science. Actually, the development of social science started after Renaissance, but before that, also in ancient India, we had beautiful Chanakya's Arthashastra. And after the Renaissance, we had beautiful development which led to Stuart Mill and which led to our democratic principles. So, the European Renaissance was understood by our Bengal Renaissance in an incomplete way. That was only in terms of humanism, which is great, rationalism, which is great, liberalism, which is great, but not in terms of scientific, evidence-based other areas of the European Renaissance. Now, if we go to even ancient Indian inspirations, as I said before, this was a rationalist, humanistic stream of philosophy. We all know that Upanishad, in parallel to Buddhist and Jaina philosophy, was a revolt. Revolt against what? Revolt against the Vedic oppressions to people in the name of caste, name of many things. But there are many positive things in Veda which was not really appreciated, because at the demand of the time, Upanishad actually was a revolt. And that is more close to the rationalist philosophy of the Greeks. Actually, Upanishad could be marked because it said Ved as a lower type of Vidya. That could be made, marked as a Gnostic, but Upanishad never told explicitly that Ved as a Shruti is not Praman, is not a proof. So, how it survived? That was I don't know whether it's a tactics or it's real, but the point is our Bengal Renaissance was inspired by rationalist thought of the Upanishads and a humanist. The empiricist philosophical ideas, some of them have been already told beautifully by Professor Dani, because there were Charbak or Lokayatas, there were Vaisheshik and Nai philosophies, and there were pragmatist, worldly philosophies of Buddhists. In fact, in Vaisheshik philosophy, they were not termed as Nastik, because in Indian system, Nastik and Astik is not based on belief in God. It is based on belief in Shruti, that is Ved. If you believe Ved as a valid source of knowledge, then you are Astik. If you don't believe Ved as a valid source of knowledge, then you are Nastik. So in Vaisheshik, only in one place they have said, or in few places, that Tat Bachanat Amlasya Pramanam, because Tat means the God's Bachan. But they just talked about matter, they talked about other things, and mostly science. That's why the traditionalists condemned these as philosophies. But in any case, Buddha, he was total silence about God's existence, etc. He thought it nishprayojan, it is immaterial, it is not necessary. In Bengal Renaissance, as I said, we had quite a number of philosophers, but we don't see them involved. They were certainly Namasya, as because they practiced, they also preached science, popular science, they worked on that. But we don't see in parallel to, like what we had in the beginning of the 20th century, like Ernst Mach or Albert Einstein or say Schrödinger, Erwin Schrödinger or Heisenberg or even Russell, the people involved in science and mathematics discussing seriously on philosophical issues. Because almost all Nobel Prize winners in physics in the early 20th century were at the same time philosophers. They had to discuss. So we don't see any such parallel in our country. As I said, Raja Ram Mohan Rai, he was a morning star of Bengal Renaissance. He was very well versed in both Eastern and Western traditions of thought. But he was absorbed with the rationalist ideas. Of course, I don't say that this is anything less, but we have to accept the fact he had very great fascination for the rationalist ideas of both East and West. He was particularly well versed in Kant, Immanuel Kant, who tried to assimilate both the empiricist and rationalist approach in science or knowledge in Europe. But the Kantian rationalism blended with the philosophy of Upanishad, this was the root of epistemological position of Raja Ram Mohan Rai and his followers. So at this point, I'll just a little bit explain what do we mean by rationalism. Ultimately, both rationalism and empiricism has observation and reason, but it is the question of primacy. Rationalism thinks that pure reason as ultimate criteria for truth. It seeks truth. Certain answers are for questions put to nature possible. Certainty, search for certainty. And that's how it becomes one step away from religion and mysticism. If you practice pure rationalism, you are just one step. If you add good literature, good story, good mythology, you can jump into religion and then go to mysticism. And empiricism, the goal is not truth. They don't bother for truth, but workable answers for questions put to nature. Observational validation or falsification. Already my previous speakers have given some idea as criteria for inference. And for this validation or falsification, there is a limit. As somebody was saying, whether we can really talk about unobservable facts, whether that is an object of science. Let me give an example. If in this room somebody puts a hypothesis that there is a bacteria in this room, it is not possible to see it right now, or even by ordinary experiments. But as a matter of principle, you can design an experiment, plan an experiment that you can condense all the air, condense it, and then put it to culture, and with reasonable certainty you can say whether there is a bacteria or not. So it is a validation on principle. If somebody says that it is raining outside, you can validate it by direct observation. So validation has different degrees, or falsification in reverse. But in science, speculation has a limit, because it must be possible to be validated, at least in principle. If somebody said there is a bhoot or ghost in this room, how do you design an experiment to prove it? That is the demarcation theory, right? So the science validation has a demarcation where you have to put a limit, at least at the available level of technology. So in science, or empiricism is not totally, science is not totally based on empiricism. It has a rational element, but in the form of mathematical reasoning. I am not going to detail for that. But science becomes essentially probabilistic. Thus, it is skeptic. It never seeks truth, not absolute truth. It's only workable solutions. So, why when we are saying that the empiricist element was absent in Bengal Renaissance, the essence of science, not the technology or the scientific development, the essence of science was missed into the large extent. Actually, Kant, in European Renaissance, Kant actually tried to assimilate scientific knowledge as a priori synthetic judgment with rationalist approach. That is a rationalist approach, and he even coined the term thing in itself, noumena, which is unknowable, as opposed to phenomena, thing as it appears, empiricist approach. So Bengal Renaissance fathers followed the first one, actually scientific knowledge as a priori synthetic judgment. We don't have time to discuss that, but Upanishad became completely compatible with Kantian rationalism. So that was a very good synthesizing point. And some Renaissance fathers, of course, like Bankim or Ishwar Chandra, was more absorbed with ancient traditional Indian revival. But in all of them, one characteristic epistemological position was that not providing enough importance to empiricist streams of thought in both Eastern and Western philosophies. Rabindranath Tagore is, as you know, he is our pride, national pride. But he had a profound admiration for Upanishad, as you know, in the Bhumika of Gitanjali, introduction of Gitanjali, and in many writings. But he was more balanced in terms of harmonizing Eastern and Western ideas. He tried to actually learn of the period of the science, or that period science, and also had contact with practicing scientists and philosophers. He had letters exchanged with Einstein and Heisenberg of the time, and the Bertrand Russell, etc. And if we read his one particular essay, Sahityer Samogri, where he divides even Gyaner Kotha, words of knowledge, and Bhaber Kotha, words of feelings. Very beautiful, essay. You should read that, all of it. Actually, for words of knowledge, it is more objective. For Bhaber Kotha, it is more subjective. And he wrote, what he wrote in his poem, that Kobi, Tabo Manubhumi, Ramer Janmabhumi, Ajodhar Che Satya Jeno. Actually, the mind of a poet or creative person is much, is more true than compared to the objective reality of Ajodhya. And in Bhaber Kotha, he has exactly said so. In Gyaner Kotha, it is more objective. So he understood the basic facts that there are the knowledge, literary knowledge and scientific knowledge are in quality different things. And he wrote Vishwa Parichaya, and he actually contributed in popular science. But if you go into details, his epistemological position still remained Upanishad, and it is metaphysical. And back to Aristotle, metaphysics is superior to physics. So at the same time, he could appreciate Einstein, and at the same time, he appreciated equally Heisenberg, not for their contributions in science, but their philosophical positions. But as you know, that Einstein, after 1925, he could not really do science. He was very much opposed to his own discovery of quantum physics. He was against uncertainty principle of Heisenberg. And even during his last breath, he said that I cannot believe that God is playing dice with this world. He never accepted moral, philosophically the uncertainty principle. He was with a traditional believing school. So like that, there are many philosophers of that period, like Schrödinger said, I hate that I had to do something with quantum physics. But it is Niels Bohr and his school which is now predominant in scientific thought, and we are really with uncertainty principle yet. So what we say that Rabindranath Tagore, in spite of his great contribution in art, literature, and all other fields, philosophically speaking, we have to accept the fact that he did not have the real understanding of the scientific philosophy as we conceive today. So there was one group which could potentially develop, a potential group to promote scientific ideas was the young Bengals, because there were a number of practicing scientists like Radhanath Sikdar, Rajnaran Boshu, and others who were really involved. But then they had extreme radicalism, not properly organized, and danger for non-religious dogmatism. I am not going to speak on that. So the legacy, I am just coming to the end, only 2 slides. The legacy of Bengal Renaissance, that economic development, partly due to scientific and technological development, progressing fast in the subcontinent. We know that our condition, economic and other conditions, are improving in general, although there are lots of pockets where the development is very poor. Scientific outlook not developing in parallel. All speakers, we all agree that we don't have a parallel scientific outlook. And in many cases, it is regressing. We are unfortunate. Actually, misuse of religion in politics, sometimes in the envelope of development, increasing. We all know, and even in India, in Bangladesh, we are misusing religion in politics. Because religion it was always a weapon, but it has now become, in this scientific world, it becomes very strange that religion is becoming increasingly a weapon for politics. And Western cars of science without ethical guidance, this is visible. So the Bengal Renaissance children from all spheres of knowledge need to understand the strength and weakness of the revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, actually my lecture is not due to a scholastic lecture. It's a very practical one, because if you understand the roots of epistemological roots, then we understand the strength and weakness. And then really we have to go understand, in my concluding slide, the facts that the whole world, especially the subcontinent, is plagued by aggressive fundamentalism and religion-based coercion of the state machineries. So uncontrolled consumerism linked with the development of science and technology leading to self-destruction. This is the whole world picture, and it is not only religious dogmatism. As you can see in Europe, in almost all countries, fundamentalism, petty nationalism, these are increasing, in non-religious also. So cultivation of scientific outlook, not merely technology, along with ethics based on liberal humanism as promoted by our Renaissance fathers. We have to accept that they had a great humanistic viewpoint, but having a good mind through a literary culture is not enough. We have to combat science with science, technology with technology, guided by ethics. That is the right way to combat the evil. So I am very inspired but to see so many young people here and so many people coming to such kind of conference, which is at the inaugural session said that it is difficult. Although difficult, I can say you that I have been running a school for 25 years in Dhaka for teaching history of ideas, conducting, discussing, reading, and I get quite a number of people every year. Every year is a new cycle. So it is difficult but not impossible, but nothing bigger than this. So the present generation has the responsibility to pursue the unfinished tasks of Bengal Renaissance, taking into consideration the experiences so far generated in the modern era, because the European experience has said that developing science and technology is not itself the solution. The solution is a balanced development of human mind combined with science and humanistic values, literary values. It is the heart which matters along with the science. Thank you very much.